Good morning and welcome to all you soybean growers and those interested in soybean production. Jesse and I will just introduce ourselves a bit here and we'll get started. So Jesse, why don't you give us a quick little background about yourself and your qualifications, why to sit in the chair here.
No, thanks. Thanks for the Soybean Association for having us today. Name's Jesse Berg. I've been with the Monsanto company for a little over 10 years. First 10 years of my stint with Monsanto, I've been in crop production in both corn and soybeans. First 5 years with corn, last 5 years of soybeans. So I've been a technical agronomist since June of this year.
Sounds good, Jesse. And Harmon Wilts, technical agronomist with the Asgrow. And I've been around here and working for the company for 22 years. Had a few different roles, kind of all the way from the agronomy side to doing some heavy-duty research and kind of helping bring on new traits, new products, and so forth. So it's been a lot of fun in my career. Lived 48 corn rows from where I grew up in Kirkoven, just west of Wilmer. So have a little farm there that our family operates. So not only do I get to work with it every day, but actually put some of these things into practice as well. So hey, Jesse, let's just get started here. And part of the webinar here was doing a little bit of research and kind of identifying, what are universities and yield contest winners? What do those folks look like when they talk about high yield soybeans? What are the factors that they look at and talk about? And so just wanted to kind of put together maybe just a little list here for you to take a look at. And some of the key things that for high yield as those folks take a look at it, it's, trait selection. What gene of Phytophthora are we picking? Are we picking a particular weed control trait? Those kind of things. Insect and disease management. Are we really controlling the insects in a timely fashion or not? And same thing with the disease. Weed management is a big one and has been. And is becoming even more of a big one, I think, Jesse, as I see it. Soil fertility is a big deal as well, and I'll let you kind of go over the rest of them. So
other things that are touched on with the university and yield contest winners. So Harmon brings up a lot of good points. Soil fertility. Also, along with that, earlier planting. Some higher plant populations possibly also mixed in there. Row spacing has also become an important topic here, catching a lot of traction within the last probably 5 to 7 years. Scouting, want things to grow right, you got to go out and scout. You got to really have to keep on top of all your issues, environmental concerns out in your fields. Seed treatments is another hot topic these days, and use of fungicides, which happens to turn out we're right in that time of the year right now, Harmon.
Certainly, Jesse, and hey, here's the Harmon and Jesse list then after we've kind of done a lot of research and experience over the years. And looking to me, previous fall tillage makes a pretty big difference. Are we building a really good seed bed for this coming year? Oftentimes, in corn we talk an awful lot about, and a lot of time is spent on really having a good seed bed. And in soybeans, it seems like we need to create more of that discussion because that's very important. Are we getting a nice, even, uniform emergence on soybeans to really maximize yield is kind of one of the top key things. And then in the spring, do we have a really good seed bed as well? Are we managing a lot of residue coming from the corn? So we're utilizing all of our plants that are out there and more of an even uniformity from that perspective. Seed variety is getting to be one of the really big things. If we look at the University of Minnesota yield trials, there's quite a bit of difference from the top to the bottom on varieties that you pick. And so really picking that right variety for the right acre. Do I have a white mold problem? You mentioned scouting, Jesse, in the past. If scouting to me is by far the most number one important thing, I think, is knowing what was the history of the field so we can make good decisions. A good example is if we had white mold in that field in the past, we really, really need to be focused on varieties that will drive white mold and be better than others. Fertility, I think a lot of times growers kind of say, well, I'm going to fertilize my corn and, the soybeans will pick up what's there, but a real conceited effort of really what does the bean really need and how to achieve high levels. And I think one of the things on this seminar we're talking about is looking at really high yielding soybeans, not the average. I think a lot of people can get in the 40s, Jesse, but shooting here for, the 55 to 75 bushel is really the key in what we're talking about here. So populations will be something we'll talk about, too, as we go through the deck here. And insect and disease management is related before. Weeds, not only on the weed side, but managing the weeds, but the crop safety part of things. And then the carryover from previous crops, really quite important if we give up a couple bushels of yield there at that point. drainage as we move into the western part of the state. Drainage everywhere, I would say, but as we move into the western part of the state, being able to manage those salts a bit more than we've been able to in the past so that we have a good high level of oxygen in that soil. Microorganisms are working well, and we have good root development, I think, is kind of key. And of course, the IDC factor in soybeans, we do promote utilizing soy green and the ortho part of it. There's a number of generics out there, but the ortho is the versions that have seemed to really do well. And we've kind of found in our research that about a 1 to 1.5 points better iron chlorosis score when we do use the ortho soy green. And then last would be kind of the last couple things would be, at the end of the season, things we maybe don't think about as much or we're in a hurry to get the crop out, but that the seed bed preparation is important too then when on the backside when we're combining at harvest so that we can get all the soybeans that are out there and lay that platform right down, have a nice smooth platform to pick up. That extra 1 or 2 bushels, I think, is really critical. And then the moisture, harvest moisture, too. We can lose a couple of bushel of beans just due to harvest moisture.
So I'm going to interrupt for just a second. I got a question from the audience. If we spent more time, do you think, if we spent more time simply focusing on soybeans, would we be able to achieve higher yield?
Well, it's a really good question from the audience. I happen to have had a wonderful experience to go to Brazil and spend a couple weeks there and really look at how growers down there work and so forth. So I really think that leads right into our kind of our next topic here. I think soybeans aren't a second-class crop anymore. They are a top-notch crop. So when I went to Brazil, it was interesting. They obviously have a very good growing environment for soybeans to begin with, so naturally a really nice spot to grow soybeans with their weather conditions. But what I've observed there and I've seen now as I've come back and we've implemented things here in the U.S. too, that if we simply spend time planning for soybeans, in Brazil they spent the majority of their time in the previous summer, the winter, going into spring, really planning the soybean crop and a lot of details of variety selection, weed control, insect management, disease management, those kind of things. I really think that we definitely are seeing the paying off. And if we do that, we are going to see higher soybean yields as long as the weather cooperates with us. So really laying out that plan, working with all your advisors all the way from, seed, fertilizer, chemistry, university folks, crop consultants, really will be the key, I think. So I think the answer to that is absolutely yes. The more time we spend focused on soybeans, the more we're going to hit. And I would say probably one area that I didn't put on the slide here to talk about is scouting. Jesse hit that a little bit earlier, that really knowing what you've got in your field. What races of Phytophthora do you have? Do you have assist numbers? Are they creeping up or not? White mold. So the more we know about our fields and the spending time with soybeans, I think will get us more yield going forward. So, yep.
So you look at all these factors, just getting more soybeans out of every acre that we grow out there, and you ask, why do we do this? Innovation, growing food more safely and sustainably. A couple points here on this slide to touch on. Growing more food from less land, increasing yields on the same amount of acres, getting, as Harmon alluded to, not only 40 to 50 bushel an acre of soybeans, getting up to 60 to 70, maybe pushing 80 to 90 bushels of acre off that same 40 or 80 acre field. On top of that, also sustainability, really preaching heavy on that, reducing our water and chemical use, being smarter when we're farming. Also tying into that, maintaining and building that healthy soil, mitigating that impact of drought, and then overall just reducing the amount of energy and emissions we require to grow food. Really looking hard at sustainability, very important now with the current environment we live in.
I think if you look at the industry in general, we're driving for higher yields, and we've talked about that as an industry, but we also as an industry, I think, have to be really cognizant of what else is around us and really maintaining our environment. So I just wanted to put a slide in here talking really about the commitments that I think overall the industry is really trying to reduce soil erosion, really trying to help doing more with less land, as we're going to have less land as we do and are in the future. The greenhouse gas thing, the energy, utilizing less energy per bushel, and applying water and so forth. So I think just as you're talking to your city cousins and people that this is an area that agriculture is very, very aware of, and we're working very hard. Some of it's traits, some of it is management practices to really focus on doing our part to raise more with less and really kind of getting it done and accomplished at that point. So in doing that, the plant breeding, just several factors around that. I'm not going to spend much time on that. You can see the slide there. But really it's all about yield and all the different factors that our breeders look at from an environmental standpoint. So
yeah, we got two questions actually from the audience. We'll jump in here. Years ago, my soybean moisture at harvest was never less than 11%. In the last 15 to 20 years, by the time I finish combining, the moisture can be as low as 7%. Why?
Yeah, it's been interesting. It depends a little bit on the year and so forth where we're at. I think I would probably point to a couple of factors. The one factor is if you look at our soybean diseases have gotten significantly better. Our soybean varieties have gotten significantly better in managing. We have more even uniformities in the field. So I would probably put it down, a piece of that on the genetic side of it. The other piece, I think, if you look at our weather, we have had some phenomenal years where it is really warm and dry in the fall, and you know, these soybeans, once they're physiologically mature, we can dry down quite fast at that point. So those would be a couple factors that I would take a look at. Genetics and the weather has changed as well. As I go back and take a look, I've analyzed quite a bit of going back and looking at that last month of the growing season. And if you look at the last 10 years, we've had a lot of really good warm, above normal evening temperatures, and it really has made a difference for us at that point. So. Yes. Yep. The other good factor that came in from the audience here in the room is the weed factor, and I can remember that from years ago. When you don't have weeds in the field, you know, you can roll and you can combine earlier and so forth too. So you got many of those factors. So okay. Well, Jesse, let's keep on moving. When should we be thinking about high yield soybeans? Do we do that in March of the year we're going to plant them, or when's the best time? What do you thought?
Yeah. So when looking at not just getting your average yields, the 40 to 50 bushel an acre, you know, if you want to plan for those high end yields, the planning for high yield soybeans really should start the summer before. Taking a look, seeing what your operations look like, get that planning started right away. On top of that, other things that fall into that planning piece, you know, your fertility testing, you know, get your soil testing done, get your grid sampling done. You know, depending on previous crop residue, Harmon alluded to earlier, you know, that seed bed, very, very crucial in, you know, getting that plan started. Fall tillage, you know, what do you need to do there based on your operations? And then preparing for planting, of course, important, again, like Harmon talked about, your spring seed bed preparation and the timing of that. When are you doing that, creating that ideal seed bed for those soybeans?
Absolutely, Jesse, and just taking a look at, you know, starting with a good seed bed, and I know we're kind of harping on that quite a little bit, but what a difference that makes when you go out to a field that's had really good fall tillage in the past, or no-till, either way, and then in the spring you have a good seed bed to move forward with. You see a lot more even, uniform stand, and that does translate into then in the fall a little bit later, more even, uniform pod development as far as nodes on the plant goes. So I just wanted to kind of throw a picture in here to kind of talk a little bit about, you know, having a good seed bed in the fall, making that then, and really being a good spot so that in the spring we're in nice shape for planting. I think in soybeans, at least on our farm, the biggest challenges in soybeans is the whole tillage piece of managing all that 230 bushel corn residue, especially in years where it's dry in the fall and it's fluffy. What do you do with all that residue? Then you come in the spring and you have a lot of material to get through at that point in time. So I want to kind of move on and kind of put a slide in here really of the growth and development of the soybean plant itself. We could spend the entire hour really just on this slide, Jesse, here, but I think my main thing here is really, if you think about this little seed over here in the left-hand corner, it's pretty precious, and it's a small little seed, and I want you to think about what are all the decisions and things that you're doing all year long to make sure you're nurturing that seed all the way from, is this the right day to plant? Is the low ground just a little bit too wet yet? Do we need to wait an extra day or two? What about the stress from iron chlorosis? What about, you know, those kinds of things? And then the root development. We need to have extremely good roots. What you tend to see is where you have really good root development, you have really good nodulation and translates into very good yields. Where we don't have good root development, translates into far less nodulation and far less yield. So I wanted to put this in here, really kind of focused in on what are the things that you're doing, all the management things that you're doing out there. Be thinking about, is this improving the soybean yield that I'm going to have, or is this taking away? And I know it's really exciting in the spring to be out there and just get rolling, and our planters are so big today that just getting started slowly puts us almost done in just about 3, 4, 5 days. So be really thinking about, what am I doing, all the things I'm doing out there, is it the right thing to get good root development and maximizing yield? So at that point. We want to shift gears a little bit and kind of dive into some of the topics and too around maturity. And one of the things that we know is that yield is really based upon how many days of sunlight, how many hours of sunlight can we capture. So we plant a little earlier to try to capture more sunlight. Can we plant a little bit later maturities to capture more sunlight? The more sunlight that we can capture, as long as we have all the other things, fertility, moisture, and so forth, we know that we can get some yield. But I wanted to kind of just show 3 slides here looking at maturity. I think was a bigger factor in the previous years. Now the breeders in the agriculture industry have got to a point where some of the earlier varieties are yielding extremely well, almost as good as some of the later varieties. So not always do we need to plant the latest on the majority of the acres. So here's just a slide here kind of looking at groups 1.4 and 1.5 in the 60 to 62 bushel, and this would be plots in 2015 across the state. And then you do see that there are a couple varieties out there that really can yield nearly with some of those later ones. So the emphasis is I think you're going to see on these 3 slides, is the later ones do give you a little more top-end yield, but in general as an industry now, we are seeing that some of the earlier varieties are doing quite well also. So spreading that risk a little bit on maturity, and we talked about our beans being really dry. At the end of the year, can we plant a little wider range of varieties so we can be timely on combining? So here again, you kind of see that 1.6s and 1.7s are yielding really nearly the same as the late group, or the early group 2, I should say, in that piece. And then as we get to a little more of the southern Minnesota piece, so we take a look at the late group 1s and early group 2s versus the very later beans that we would plant across the state for the most part. So I guess what I was getting at is in maturities, obviously we know the later maturities have more yield potential, but the earlier ones, the emphasis here, that little more of a package, a little earlier ones, we're not giving up the yield, Jesse, that we used to give up as we move to slightly earlier varieties. So kind of keep your variety selection, your combine capacity, those kind of things in mind. Sometimes people plant a little earlier variety to avoid white mold or trying to do things to manage the scenario. We give the growers, actually, you're not able to see this slide real well, but all of you can go to our seed guide or anybody else's seed guide, any of the other companies that are selling soybeans, and really focus in on this whole planning thing about soybeans. Again, Jesse, really focus in on what are the ratings of these varieties, and you know what, don't ever hesitate to call a company rep or call a university folk or a crop advisor to say, hey, how do you feel about this variety? Are these ratings really solid? Are they good? I get people calling all the time saying, Harmon, on white mold, what do you really think? What's your gut feeling? What have you seen? I know what the ratings are. So utilize all the resources at your hand is really the main reason for this slide really here. Every company has data. I know in our seed guide there's data that backs up every piece of information we have in here, so feel free to utilize that. So I think the more you utilize this information and understand what does the soybean do, what is it not going to do, what is it really good at, where are the weak points, and we manage that up with our scouting and what we've done with the history that we know in our field, we are naturally, if we do that, we are really going to raise good, better soybeans than we did before, a little bit alluding to your earlier question. So Next couple slides, I just wanted to kind of dive a little bit deeper into that discussion. And I wanted to highlight I'm using two different varieties here to just kind of highlight some of the differences as we really look at it. So we have an 09 here, and some of the key things with this 09, if you take a look at it, it's got a 2 very, very good standability, pretty reasonable iron chlorosis, very good cis nematode. It's got very good, one of the top phytophthora, the new phytophthora now, Jesse, that really is moving forward, covers race 25, is the RPS3A gene, and good field tolerance as well, but white mold is quite good. So here's a variety here that really we would position as can kind of go in a lot of different places and do a lot of different things. It's one that it's hard to mess up. So it really fits a wide range of soils and so forth. So you have a variety like this that you could utilize as a grower. So dive in and really get to know that. The next variety I'm going to show you here is a 1-4, and this is more sensitive. This is the higher yielder of the two. So if I'm just looking at yield data, I'm going to select this 14X7. But as I take a look at it, it could be a little misleading if I put it in the wrong place. So the emphasis here for you as soybean growers is really making sure we're picking the right variety, not always looking at, the best yielder. It's got to yield good, don't get me wrong, Jesse, but in this case here, we've got a 5 of iron chlorosis. So this is one that if you're in the western half of the state, you need to kind of manage where we put this variety. If we put it in the wrong place, that high yield goes away pretty fast. So the other emphasis then would be around white mold, not as good of white mold score. So really, I think the main thing I wanted to share with these two different varieties is that, yep, you got one that's an extremely high yielder, but we need to kind of manage it a little bit tighter and where we put it to get that high yield. If we back up to the previous one, this is a little more variety that doesn't have quite the top end yield, but a lot more diversity. That it's a little harder to mess up as we go forward. So, okay.
Very important to spread your risk out there, and those are two very, very good examples.
We have a couple of questions here, and I hope we're not jumping too far around, but one of them is how many and which types of soybean cyst nematode resistance are best and should be utilized in fields, and what's your recommendation there?
If we can hold that question just a few slides, we'll talk about that. So we'll get to that in just a couple minutes. So excellent. So okay, thank you for the question, and Ryan, make sure that we do cover that. I've got some slides in here on that.
Perfect. And actually, one more, and maybe you'll get to this too, but I just want to get it out there just so it's there. What about the impact on pollinators? How do we kind of be smarter with that, and what's the?
Yep. So no, very, very good question from the panel. Kind of touched on that earlier. Sustainable agriculture, being smarter with what we're using out there, herbicides and insecticides both.
I would say that the pollinators have got an awful lot of discussion and an awful lot of work the last number of years, as alluding to kind of the bee population decreasing, and there's a lot of discussion of why that is, and a group of some of the groups out there talk about, well, it's the neonicotinoids that are causing some of this issue, as in what's in the seed treatments. There's a lot of research is showing that they really had collapsed due to some of the natural items that are going on, diseases and so forth. And so I think, probably a combination of both at that point, and therefore we need to really do a nice job. I think a lot of people now in agriculture have stepped up, and we're really looking at what can we do. It is a topic. What can we do to make sure our pollinators continue to move forward and be there? So we've got a couple of initiatives at Monsanto and Asgrow to really promote our growers to actually go out and create some environments that would be positive to the pollinators. And so I do think that there's an awful lot of topic around that, and people are becoming more aware of that as well. And but I would probably say from my end of it, I think agriculture in general kind of gets the blame for things that aren't always 100% the way it is. So, but okay, let's move on from there. Good questions, and we'll come back and hit the cyst piece in there. So, Jesse, what is the correct population that we should be planting? Do we plant all our varieties? Should we plant them all at the same population?
Yeah, so a lot of it depends on, you look at the slide here. So should we plant all varieties at the same population? Lots and lots of factors that go in with that. Again, it's not just an easy question. You got to plan out for it. Some of the factors, maturity. what type of maturity you're looking at. White mold, Harmon talked before about the 09 and the 14 maturity being, you know, if it's susceptible to white mold, you probably don't want to plant that heavy population. You'll be planting yourself into a potential future issue. IDC, you know, if you have an IDC spot or a lot of activity out in the field, maybe increasing population a little bit. And then big factor here, you know, live seed. And just so there's clarification on that, so live seed. So if you have we'll just pick 2035s. If they're at a 90% germ in southern Minnesota, you'd need to plant those at 155,555 plants per acre if you want a final stand of 140,000. People realizing that. Oftentimes you'll plant at 140,000, use a 140K unit per acre, and you go out and look at the field and you end up with a stand count of 130,000. And farmers might think, what happened here? Well, that's where you have to take that live seed factor into consideration. So very important factor there.
Certainly. So we really want to kind of focus on, I think when we talk about soybean population, the live seed. So you need to go to your bag tag and identify, you know, is it 90% germ? Is it 95% germ? Is it 98% germ? And we want, you know, the data what we're looking at here and utilizing is really the live seed piece of it, so giving you that math. And I think some of the other factors is where are you in the state? Are you in northern Minnesota, central Minnesota, and southern Minnesota? So we've had a chance to really dive in and take a look at, this is some work that came out of the University of Minnesota that they put together, and looking at different groups. So instead of where you are, what group maturity are you planting to achieve? And, you know, here's a spot I think that, Jesse, I want to just stop and take a minute and say that, you know, I think 100,000 plants per acre is going to give you a pretty decent yield. We've seen that. We know that with research that's come out of the University of Minnesota, work that we've done, hail, fields, things like that. But what we're talking about today isn't just achieving average yields. We're you know, when we're talking about the yields that we're looking for here, we're kind of taking a look at, you know, 55 to 75 bushels is what we're shooting for. So we're looking for some good soybean yields as we go across. So in general, if we think about Group 0, 160K live, 160,000 plants of live. Group 1, 150, and Group 2, 140. And, you know, why is that? You know, the Group 0 beans just don't get as tall. There's not as many pod sites. So the way that we make up that difference in yield somewhat is, you know, we're not going to fully make up the difference from a group 0 to a Group 2. We talked about a slide or two earlier that the early beans have gotten a lot better, but the way to make up a little bit of that yield difference there is to plant just a little bit thicker so that we get a few more pod sites on that soybean plant and to give us a little more top-end yield as we go forward. So on the chart below here is just kind of looking at, hey, then if you have a 90% germ, what would I need to plant? So in a Group 0, if I have 160,000 live plants per acre that I'm looking for, I need be planting at 177,000. So those are just kind of some ranges to kind of look at there for you. I do think a couple of other factors that have come in the last couple of years, I think we hit from my perspective, we kind of hit a low point on plant population 2 years ago, where guys really did skinny down the planting population. And then we really moved into this big emphasis of putting pre's on to control weeds. And we do see that when we use some of these good pre's at a full rate, we do have some crop injury in the spring, and we do lose a few plants. And so I've seen guys now, our growers, ticking up just a little bit to compensate for that as well. But if I look at our yield chaser, high yielder soybean contest winners, these are the ranges that are in, and that really matches up with what some of the folks are doing out there as well. Again, can you get a decent soybean crop at 100,000 plants per acre? You can. But to achieve these kind of bushels year in, year out consistently, we need to kind of be in those locations to get that done. So, okay. Kind of the, what about early planting, Jesse? We talked about that. It's interesting, 2 years ago, one of the companies came out with this recommendation to plant beans like really early, ultimately, you know, 20th of April in places and so forth. So let's just spend a couple minutes talking about early planting and pros and cons of it.
Yep. So we've all been there before. You know, the calendar's coming. We've been shacked up all winter long, and boy, we really want to get out to the field. You know, what are some pros and the cons of making that early decision and getting out there? Pros, depending on environment, yield potential, capturing more additional sunlight, getting the reproductive stages a lot faster. Getting in there early plant growth, development, you get that earlier canopy. You touched on weed control, using the pre's. You might be using your pre and early planting. If you get through it unscathed, so to speak, that canopy might be there, and that first post application might not be as difficult as you may originally thought it might be. Reducing that weed competition. Some of the cons now with early planting that we tend to see a lot of year in and year out, increase of that early season disease, getting that Phytophthora, Fusarium, Rhizoctonia, planting into those conditions. We get this cool, wet soils, not really a good thing out there. Also increased potential of the reduced stands, frost injury, big factors there.
We kind of saw that one this last year, didn't we? That frost about May 21st, whenever it was. Some of the guys, the first year that I can remember in a long time, we did replant some soybeans, and we were probably fortunate there was about 10 days of really cool weather in there. The beans didn't emerge, otherwise we'd have probably had to replant a lot more, but yep. That is a big risk, yep. And then as you get into the western part of the state, this whole iron chlorosis stress piece, and so can we be planting beans a little too early, you think, Jesse? And we'll come back, and what is our recommendation?
Yep.
I think if you take a look at, I think we can be planting soybeans too early. To me, I've probably seen really beans are made, and if you think about it, July and August are the two big soybean months. And if you've done everything right, and you think about that slide we showed you a while ago of all the factors, that soybean plant, if you've done everything right and we get some nice timely rains in July and August, that will make the biggest difference on the soybean crop. So I'm a big believer in early planted. Don't get me wrong, I do think that it's an important thing to do, but I do see that we can be too early. We have a little too much compaction, a little frost, stress to IDC. So my recommendation really is the kind of break the state up a little bit in that central part of the state, maybe kind of that, I'd probably say that Redwood Falls and north. Let's do it that way. I think planting much before May 1 is kind of a challenge, especially as you move west with iron chlorosis. If we take Redwood Falls and south, that last week of April seems to be a time frame that has worked okay. Now this year is an exception because the beans got up, and guess what? We got that frost on May 20th, and we do see that once in a while. So to me, I think those are some dates. What I would do is on my iron chlorosis, I'd wait a week, let that soil get warmed up a little bit, let it dry out a little bit more. So kind of that'd be the recommendations I think I would leave people with as far as planting dates. So would you agree with that? Or?
Yes, I would. And like Harmon said, keep an eye on that the soil temperatures.
Okay. All righty, let's move on and talk a little bit about the fertility piece. Here's an area that excites me. I like to eat, and I believe soybean plants do too. And how do you grow? If you got the proper nutrients, a good balance, you're going to do well. And if you're short, you're not going to. And so historically, I think most growers have really said, well, I'll just fertilize for the corn. That's the king crop in the state, and then we'll go ahead and let the beans just get the rest of it, right? And so in the last few years, as we've really looked at focusing more on soybeans and raising high yield soybeans, I look at our soybean yield grower contest folks that are out there, and soybean fertility is one of the things that always comes up with the winners, that they are focused on what their soil tests are. They are focused on what the soybean needs to achieve high-yielding soybeans. And a number of them are putting fertilizer on the spring before soybeans as well. From my perspective, I'm okay either way. If you're going to feed the crop and do it in a 2-year increment where you put both the corn and soybean fertilizer on ahead of the corn, I'm okay with that. And if you put it on before soybeans, I'm okay with that too, just so it gets done. And wanted to just say that it takes a lot of fertility, P and K, that 0.8, 0.9 pounds per bushel of P2O5 and about 1.5 pounds of K2O for each and every bushel. So, Jesse, if we're going to shoot for a 60-bushel bean crop, 54 pounds of phosphorus and 90 pounds of potassium. And, we have a lot of growers achieving more than 60. You think about the last couple of years of good growing conditions, we're seeing higher yields than that. So keep in mind, that's a lot of material that we need to be putting on, and are we getting it done? So I'm a big guy on fertilizer and fertility. making sure that we've got it done. So, okay.
Yeah, it's like Harmon talked about, optimizing some of that fertility. Just going through some of these points really quickly. You know, one of the most overlooked areas, you know, of high yield soybean production. You know, like we've kind of touched on, don't treat soybeans as nutrient scavengers. We talked about, you know, what soybeans remove from the soil, and then important thing to consider, you know, 50 to 80% of the soybeans plant nitrogen uptake comes from the biological nitrogen fixation. Remainder must come from either the soil or fertilizer from outside the plant in itself.
And Jesse, one of the other topics that guys have been really working on the last 5, 6, 10 years is that do we add some supplemental N to our soybeans to get some additional top end yield? As you can see that, you know, soybean plant really needs 4.7 pounds of N per bushel. You know, corn only needs about 0.8. And so let's just talk about this for just a minute, the pros and cons of the nitrogen piece, adding to soybeans or not adding to soybeans. And I think some of it stems to what is your problem, what is your issue. We do know from the work George Ream and folks have done that the more nitrate traits we have in the soil, the more challenging the iron chlorosis can be. So early nitrogen carryover from other crops and putting in on early can maybe make the IDC problem, iron chlorosis, a bit more of a challenge. We do know that a lot of N early up front in soybeans is really going to promote that growth and vegetation. So everywhere else in the state where we have white mold problems creates an issue with the white mold too. You get all this vegetation. And thirdly then is the more supplemental N you have early, there is a potential for a little less nodulation in the soybean plant actually making its own nitrogen. So I think a lot of work has been done, and the research that we've looked at is that early N can be dangerous, but if we could find a way to put some additional supplemental N on a little later in the season, but it's quite a bit later in the season as we kind of get into that R2 range, R3. So it's not been an easy thing in soybeans, but I would probably say be careful in the nitrogen management in soybeans. I would really focus most of my effort on the P and K and things like that. So
keeping an eye on those soil samples, like
you
talked about, soil testing, Harmon.
There will be more work being done in this area as we go forward. So what about iron chlorosis? You either have the problem or you don't, and if you have it, it's a problem, and if you don't even think about it. So let's just take a couple minutes on the iron chlorosis. You know, why is iron important to the plant? I think that affects everybody. If we take a look at it, we need the development of chlorophyll. So basically, photosynthesis is why iron is so important to have. And this would affect guys with high pH, and it would affect guys with low pH too, and we have both in the state. Our growers usually have, there's not a lot of growers that have a field that's a nice even 7. It's usually you got 5.5 or you got 7.5. So, you know, iron is really important, and in both spectrums, we tend to not use the iron. We're not able to uptake the iron. So iron is really important for the development of chlorophyll, photosynthesis. It obviously affects yield, energy transfer, plant respiration, plant metabolism, as you can see there, the enzyme piece as well in the plant, and also root nodulation as well. So iron is very important in the plant to have to kind of help us out. But having too much or too little can be the challenge, and that's what we do run across here in the state of Minnesota. What is it not? I just wanted to, Jesse, throw a couple slides in here to look at what is it not, and this is obviously not iron chlorosis.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So just a few slides here real quick. So that what is it not? So this picture here, it's more of a manganese deficiency symptoms, more of a yellowing tissue between the green veins.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also what it is not really, I want to give you a shot of potassium so that we could take a look at that. That's the outer leaves that are going to be more yellowish and whitish is what you're going to tend to see. So that's what it is not. But then what is it actually? If we take a look at this picture here, really shows some really nice what it is. As we get into the trifoliates, we tend to see the chloroticness in here, the interveinal, and you can really see that it's more in the top, not those bottom leaves, and it's the interveinal greening in here, and obviously then the yellow, as people can kind of see that and have noticed that. What I look at in soybean varieties, the good ones still will turn yellow, Jesse, as we see it, but the good ones will tend to be in a spot where they will, it's more of a brighter yellow, and they'll work their way out of it. Kind of that peak time frame is kind of the last week of June to the first week of July, where we tend to see the peak IDC challenge. But varieties like a 1733 or others that are really top-notch and good scores, they will turn yellow, but it's more of a bright yellow. You'll go out there and you'll continue to see the growth on that new leaf. Those that aren't so good, like a 1431, they're going to tend to be less bright yellow and a little bit more brown, and the brown and iron chlorosis is not a lot of fun, not good as we move forward. So what are the favorable conditions to have iron chlorosis, Jesse?
So your high pH soils, one of them, you know, you talk about pHs around 7.4 and higher, floating right around that mark. Previous years, what's happened? If it's wet, then a dry spring, some lower elevations, and then your heavily poorly drained soils, a lot of your heavy clay soils are conducive for IDC.
So tiling would make a difference. If we did some pattern tiling, try to keep the salts from coming up, would help us a lot. Have more oxygen in the soil, great.
Yep. Also, factors that can get in there for IDC, excuse me, herbicide stress, any type of extra stress factors outside of the high pH in itself, also aid in IDC development, and then your fields with higher nitrate levels like Harmon alluded to earlier.
One of my worst fields of iron chlorosis was the guy had sweet corn the year before, Jesse. They didn't take it, he plowed it under, and it was loaded with nitrates, and it really was a pretty bad situation. Here's a couple photos just in the spring here. Not only do we deal with the high pH, but the salts, I think, are the big thing as we move west, and you can see this white as we're driving in March and April down the road. Some photos I stopped. I did stop. I didn't take this picture driving, by the way. Stopped and took a picture here of the white, and this is the salts that have come up. And then we had this really dry spring and created kind of a tough, really tough IDC year, 2016, as we go forward. Here's a nice, really nice little chart that's put out by AgVice, looking at the three factors that we deal with here are the pH side of things, and then the calcium carbonates and the soluble salts. And I'm not going to bore you too much, but the higher the carbonates, the higher the soluble salts, guess what? The more iron chlorosis problems we're going to have. And I kind of have a gauge of, you know, if we've got soluble salts kind of in that 0.4 and lower, and carbonates 4 or lower, we tend to not have too many problems. But if one or both get higher than that, we tend to have some serious issues with iron chlorosis kind of going forward. So just some key management options as we look at it, or things to think about. Knowing your field. What is your pH, salts, carbonates? What's your nitrates level? What have you done the year before? What soil type do we have in drainage? Really looking at these soil tests. You can look at use some imagery. We happen to have climate that works quite well to look 3 years back at imagery to kind of help us with these soils. What does it look like? We can use our yield maps as well to try to define these areas and maybe put a little more soy green, variable rate soy green in those areas. Variety selection is really key. Iron products, ortho is kind of the key from my perspective over the years, seeing that. The variability rate, varying your rate of plant population, a little higher population in those IDC areas as we get planters that can vary populations as we go forward. Minimizing plant stress like we talked about, and then the nitrate level, kind of managing those are things that will definitely improve and help you from an iron chlorosis standpoint. And just a couple of photos as we take a look at, we have something called a one-row pH plot where we use 1733s as the tester. So every 2 rows we have 1733s, and so every variety is either 22 or 30 inches away from 1733s, and that's how we come up with our breeders come up with our score, and then Jesse and I take and put these plots out to really say, yes, this is very accurate with the salts and carbonates, or no, it's not. So we'll just kind of float through some of those photos. And then we always like to give growers an opportunity to kind of look at what are the best varieties, what are the varieties not quite so good, but can't just look at this. You have to have some other factors too. So, okay. Jesse, we better keep on moving. The hour is flying by quite quickly here for us, and wanted to just touch on a couple other factors, one being white mold. That is a big thing across the state. If we take a look at, especially as we are achieving higher and higher soybean yields, variety selection is a big deal. You can see in my photo here, we've got 8 rows of a variety that does have some white mold in it, but significantly less than varieties on each side of it within the same maturity. And this is one that we rate quite good. So really understanding your varieties, I think, is really kind of key going forward. This is the life cycle chart, really, of if we take a look at the white mold piece. You know, here's the little sclerotia that look like little mouse droppings that when the bean plant has a white tissue on it and it's dead. If you take a look and cut the stem open, these little white droppings here called sclerotia are in the bean pods or in the stem. They drop. That's actually the seed that actually creates these little mushrooms here. Those little mushrooms then, in the right conditions, right environment, will let off aspial spores here, and those spores is what can enter into the flower as we go forward here. So trying to figure out what is the right timing, what do we do, is kind of the key moving forward, and obviously this is what it looks like as we move forward, and you can see the symptoms, the bleaching. They're not hard to find. Starting to see a little bit of that today, the last few days as we kind of move forward. So recommendations from a white mold standpoint, I see our slides are stuck here. We'll just give it a minute as we go forward. So Jesse, some recommendations when it comes to white mold. What do we think about? What do we do?
Yep. Harmon mentioned, you know, variety selection. We've hit on that pretty hard today. Looking at a variety, if it's conducive out there for white mold, getting a variety that has a very good white mold score. Also looking at, you know, I mentioned before about planting population. If you have a variety that might have a little bit of risk for white mold development, probably don't want to bump up populations way too high to where you have a lot of density out in those fields. Exactly,
and our slide did move forward. So this is some work that was done out of Wisconsin, and I won't dive into it real heavy, but if we take a look at incidence of disease, you know, at what point if we put an application out there. So if using a fungicide is one option too. So really knowing your field is one. Being able to variable rate the pockets in the field. So in some cases we might go as low as 110,000 in some of the pockets that we know we have white mold and varieties to kind of manage this disease. And then, you know, one of the other options here is using a fungicide. And so the data that I've looked at, you know, ideally we'd probably do a 2-pass system, but that gets to be quite expensive. So ideally it'd be 2, and we have some folks under irrigators that are doing a 2-pass system and still achieving that 75 bushel of beans. If they do a 1-pass, they're in the 50s. So it is working, but for many that isn't achievable. From the information and things that we've looked at, I think if you're going to do an application, that R1 is really probably the best time. If you think about it's going to enter the flowers, when are we at the most susceptible, and when we have the most amount of flowers is when we're most susceptible. So I think that's kind of probably the best timing as we take a look at it from that perspective. So Jesse, the white mold piece, definitely something that we're going to need to continue to talk more and more about. Disease I see that will be more critical as we grow more and more soybeans from that perspective. A couple other diseases would be early season diseases. Pythium is probably the #1 thing I see across the state as we move forward in diseases, especially as we're planting earlier in a little cooler conditions. Phytophthora is a little something that I see some of, but I think more Pythium as I go forward as we're using seed treatments and diseases. Some Rhizoctonia where you're cool, wet, early, and then you get hot and dry later. We tend to see some diseases, and then some Fusarium kind of kicking in too. But for the most part, I think the key really is that Pythium one that I see early in the spring doing a lot of damage, and then the Phytophthora a little bit later in the year. And just put together a little slide here. You kind of have to have the right temperatures, the right environment. Obviously, the beans are the right host. We've got the soil, the diseases in the soil. And if we have these temperatures with these particular diseases at that time, we will see it show up. So those are some things that we take a look at. So insects as well, we got to control the insects from that perspective. Aphids, everybody's kind of in the heat of spraying those at this point in time. The one question that we didn't get to that I want to touch on right now really is around cyst nematode. And if we take a look at, I think the question is what are the different sources of cysts that we have out there? And if you take a look at, these are the different sources that we've used in our breeding program or tried to use or tried to implement. At the end of the day, the PI-88788 is in the majority of the soybeans that we have, and really for one reason mainly, and that's what yield. We've really tried hard to work with the Hartwig, the Cystex, because that's a different source, another source, a better source as far as killing the cysts. but we just can't get any yield. And we brought some out, and growers tend to not want to plant a variety, or buy a variety, I should say, or plant that's 5 to 6, 7 bushels less. So there's some Pekings that are out there too. Yield has been a little bit of a factor, but cyst nematode going forward is something I think we have to manage too. So to me, the two big things in soybeans going forward is cyst and the whole pH. From a cyst perspective, in the short term, there's a pretty deadly seed treatment coming out in the next 2 years that's really going to help us, and then from there, I think the biotech transgenic we'll have to rely on that going forward from that perspective. So, okay, we're kind of at a time here where we're getting to the point we need to take some questions and from the field, and I wanted to kind of slide through and talk about a couple of things right here before we kind of end the talk, and that is, and open it up to the floor. So there's a few things we didn't get through, Jesse. Weed control was a big thing. I think with Roundup Xtend being approved, most companies in the industry will have Roundup Ready Xtend so we can get back to good weed control and non-crop injuries. So I think that's going to be a big deal for us as well. But of the factors that Jesse and I kind of came up with, we just put roughly what would some yield pieces be to these factors. And so a good example, previous fall tillage, I think you could add a couple bushels in there. And this is only gut feeling from us and not research, but we look at seedbed preparation, we look at variety selection, you can see the bushels we've attached to that. So if I was normally getting about 47 bushels of the yield and I could really focus hard on these factors that we talked about, I could potentially pick up 34 more bushels to equal 81 bushels. So Jesse, you might say, Harmon, you're a little off the wall, that's a little crazy, maybe is it achievable? Last slides I'm going to show here is these are the yield contest winners that we've had across the state of Minnesota. In 2012, we have guys that are achieving some 74, 82 bushels and 13, 60s to 80s. 2015, last year, a little better yields even yet. So I think if you take a look at that whole aspect, it is definitely achievable to get some high yields if we focus on soybeans going forward. So, Brian, do we need to open it up to questions?
Yeah, I think this is a good time to open it up to questions, both from in the room and on the online. So please type them into the Q&A section on the right-hand side, or if you're in the room, just raise your hand and we'll get you.
As they're doing that, question that came from the audience here, would you discuss the difficulty of proper white mold fungicide application? And I think to me that is a very difficult to manage white mold using fungicides, but we're going to have to get better at that. And so, you know, ideally, if you think about how those spores get into the plant and how we get white mold, we touched on that they enter through the flowers, right? So most of the fungicides will, you know, maybe give you a residual of, you know, 8 to 14 days, something like that. So what size are these soybeans? So if we take a look at the actual application method, if we're going through and spraying our last pass of Roundup, for example, you know, a lot of guys would like to just throw the fungicide in there too, right? But here's the problem, Jesse. Roundup, we want a big droplet, right? And to drop on that leaf and really kill that weed, or any other herbicide too that we're going to use, okay? Fungicide, what do we want there? We want a mist. We want really good coverage. So we're probably talking about spraying a herbicide in that 30 PSI range. Spraying a fungicide, we'd like to probably be in the 70 to 100 PSI to really do a good job and get coverage. So you really have that challenge right there that it really is not the proper way to really put it on. And the proper way would be to spray your herbicides, kill your weeds, do a great job at that, and then come back with another application through the field of that fungicide. So if you really want to do a great job, that is what you want to do. If you want to cut some corners, you know, put them both on at the same time. But the challenge is you're probably not going to kill the weeds like you should. You may drift out into the neighbors, and you really aren't going to get the fungicide applied the way it should either. So the other thing is if you've used fungicides, some of these can really gum up. Some of them can really be thick, and so really cleaning that sprayer out good. So that's the application part of it. The timing is the big thing. You know, I think the big deal here is that if you're going to really try to do a really good job, you're going to need to be in a spot where we're going to spray twice. I like to spray right at the end of, you know, right at that R1, and then watch the weather and the temperatures, and then come back 2 weeks later that would be the Cadillac program, I think, when it comes to the white mold piece. So. Okay, a couple of questions that have come in. What are your thoughts on row width and yield? Jesse, do you have any thoughts on that, or you want me to tackle that?
No.
Row width and yield. There's been a lot of work that shows that when we can move from 30 to something narrower, we can pick up some additional yield. A good example is, when we move from 30 down to 15-inch rows, a lot of data would show between 3.5 and 4.5 bushels additional yield. There are some issues that happen, though, when we do that. One is like we just were talking about, white mold, standability, some of those things. So just because you move to a narrower bean row doesn't mean that you're automatically going to get that yield. I think as we move to that narrower bean yield, we have to have a little better management, and that is being able to manage white mold a little bit better. The other piece of it is, I'm not a big fan of really narrow rows, 7.5 inch. Using a drill is a little more of a challenge for me because we are having a lot more opportunity for white mold in the canopy, 1, and for 2, it's really hard to regulate, the seeds and get them equally distributed out. But yes, we can pick up some yield going from 30s down to 15-inch rows. Got to have a couple different planters. Some folks have chose the route of let's switch the operation to 22-inch rows and have the best of kind of both worlds kind of fit right in between there. So I do like the narrower rows for the canopy part, where we actually are, from a weed control perspective, the canopy just a little bit quicker, and I do also like it from the standpoint in dry years, kind of preserving a little bit, where when we get that hot sun or baking down on the soil, you have some challenges there too. So so there is definitely some differences. Can we get some pretty good yields out of 30-inch rows? Yes, we can, but those are some of the factors going forward. So, okay, one other one. Have you seen foliar fungicides as well as foliar micronutrients show large benefits? I would say that in both categories, it's really a little bit harder to consistently spray after spray, year after year, show really, consistent, get your money back kind of thing and make a nice profit. Fungicides, for example, depending on the timing of when the white mold and the temperature is. If you, for example, spray at R1 and the conditions really weren't good for white mold, the wrong temperatures, all that stuff, you probably weren't going to get it anyway. And then if the temperatures are right a little bit later, 2 weeks later after you've sprayed, for example, it's ideal for white mold and your fungicide has run out, you're going to go, hey, that really didn't pay, So timing, to me, in the environment is a really big deal. The micronutrients, I think there's some opportunity there. Here's what I tell guys. When you've mastered everything and you've got great fertility in the soil, you've done everything right, the next step is to use some micronutrients to really take you to that next level. I like to make sure we have plenty of P and K and boron and zinc in the soil first, and then we'll start fine-tuning. So, and a little bit depends upon the moisture. So those two both are a little harder to get your money back. I'm going to probably put more of my dollars in the fungicide piece than I am the micronutrients right now, just because of white mold issues and so forth. So
lots of studies going into both of those right now as well.
Yep.
Great. Well, this concludes our webinar for today, Top Tips for Maximizing Your Soybean Yield. On behalf of Project Grow and the Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council, I'd like to thank Harmon and Jesse for their time and valuable insights they shared with us today. We encourage you to visit the Project Grow section at mnsoybean.org to review this webinar and for other content that will help you become a more successful soybean farmer. We'll be having another webinar with Ed Ussett, University of Minnesota Grain Marketing Economist, on August 17th at 7 p.m., titled Constructing Your Post-Harvest Grain Marketing Plan. So please look for more information on that and watch for other future events like this from Project Grow. Thank you.